it just seems incredibly hard, increasingly hard to get legislation passed through Congress and to the president's desk. And so we all started asking ourselves, why? What is it? What's going wrong out there that prevents the people of the United States from getting the government that they want? And the reasons, when you look at it, are pretty plain. You've got partisan gerrymandering. You've got dark money in our politics that gives donors, particularly very large corporate donors, undue influence over the system, all the way to rules in the US Senate that allow 40 senators representing, believe it or not, 19% of the American people to block just about any bill that would otherwise go forward, even if 80–90% of the American people support that bill. So at every stage, there is a structural impediment to democracy, to the majority rule that is supposed to be the heart of our democracy. And so H.R. 1 is the comprehensive answer to that problem. Many of you know the key parts of it. I'll just run through them very, very quickly to frame our discussion. The bill tries to make it easier for people to vote, to improve access to the ballot box through things like automatic voter registration, expanding the early voting by mail and through drop boxes that was so successful in giving us such an incredibly high turnout in 2020, including in New Jersey. It would end partisan gerrymandering by requiring every state to have a nonpartisan commission to draw electoral districts. It would give us more secure elections, secure from hacking, secure from foreign interference. One of my bills is part of H.R. 1. It's a bill that prohibits campaigns in the future from doing what the Trump campaign apparently did in 2016 when it shared polling data with what turned out to be Russian intelligence agents. Still seems crazy, but it happened, and we prohibit that in this large package. It attacks the problem of unaccountable dark money influencing elections by requiring every organization in America that is trying to influence elections by putting up ads on TV to disclose its large donors. Right now, those donors can be completely anonymous. And of course, they can donate unlimited amounts because of the Citizens United decisions. And it also includes a whole range of good government ethics reforms, everything from prohibiting members of Congress from serving on corporate boards to requiring future candidates for president and vice president to disclose their tax returns, as our former president strangely refused to do. So those are some of the really important things that the bill does, which I believe are embraced again by the vast majority of Americans, Democrats, Republicans, and independents. And yet, in the Congress, we still have a very, very powerful faction of people who are dead set against this. Now, I've listened to the debate. We had a debate again in the House of Representatives this past week because I kind of buried the lead here. We passed H.R. 1 again in the House of Representatives the night before last. So we had a debate, a good debate. And I sat there and I listened to some of the arguments on the other side. And, you know, I'm always open to people in the other party saying, look, you've got some great ideas here, Tom, but there's this one piece of the bill or another piece that makes us uncomfortable and we want to work with you to try to fix it. But that's not, for the most part, what we heard. What we heard was wholesale opposition to the concept of election reform and ending dark money and ethics reform. So some of the arguments that were made, one of the most popular ones was that this bill, H.R. 1, is a federal government takeover of our elections, which are supposed to be handled by the states. And, you know, if somebody wants to make that constitutional argument, I'm open to it, but not if you voted on January 6th to refuse to certify a presidential election, to refuse to accept a presidential election that was certified by the states. 140 Republican members of Congress gave up the right to criticize H.R. 1 on those grounds when they cast that disastrous vote. Another argument that I heard one member of Congress make was that H.R. 1, get this, bans anonymous speech in America. And I sat there scratching my head like, what are they talking about? What do you mean bans anonymous speech? And then I realized that what they meant was that big money contributions are speech, and that if you can't make them anonymously, then somehow your right to anonymous speech is being undermined. And think about how crazy that is. If you or I give $200 to, a candidate for Congress or president, it is publicly reported. But if the Koch brothers on the right or George Soros on the left write a $5 million check to some super PAC to buy an election, like, they have a right to be anonymous, because it somehow might embarrass them if people knew that they were having that much influence over our political system. So it's a really, really disingenuous argument. And then the final one that I heard that really stuck with me was when something like this, people wait in line all the time. We wait in line at the DMV when we need to get a driver's license. We wait in line at the grocery store. We ought to be willing to wait in line to vote. And I heard that and I was like, so if I introduced a bill that made it so no one had to wait in line at the DMV, you'd be against it? I mean, aren't we supposed to be trying to make things easier for people? Isn't that our job? If we can make interactions with government easier, with less paperwork and less red tape, that shouldn't we be trying to do that? Isn't that what conservatives generally are for? And yet these folks are like arguing that's a proof of your manhood. Sorry to use a gendered term, but like you got to show you care enough about democracy that you're willing to wait for 5 hours in the sun. And if you're in Georgia, no one's allowed to give you water, right? So if you really think about these arguments, they are mostly silly. And the reason is that the true argument is not what they're saying. The true argument is that there are a lot of people who have been elected, who have been given power under the current system. And they're afraid of changing the system because they're afraid that if more people had access to the ballot box, and if elections couldn't be bought with dark money, they couldn't get elected. That's the problem. And they can't say that. Although occasionally, even in the Supreme Court, they let slip a few honest admissions, as we've seen, of what they're actually afraid of. So that's the debate. We passed it in the House. It's on to the Senate. I know you guys will have a lot of questions about the politics of this and the tactics of how we get this done. There's also, by the way, we're talking about H.R. 1, there's also H.R. 4, the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, which we want to kind of loop into this conversation as well today, because it's very relevant. And we'll get to that. I know Tiffany will have a lot to say, but all I can tell you is that there's never been a great reform in American history that got done the first time around, that got done in one shot. Look at the history of the civil rights legislation of the 1960s. If those folks had given up after their first try, we would never have passed civil rights legislation. So we are on a road that leads to success, which I hope will happen very quickly, but it will happen. And it'll happen in good measure because of the leadership and creativity and passion of advocates like Tiffany Muller and End Citizens United. And so I'm really grateful to you, Tiffany, for joining us, and over to you for a few opening words.
Well, thank you so much, Congressman. And it's such an honor to be back with you. I wish we could do this in person, but every single time I have the privilege to join you for one of these events, I am always just blown away by by the passion and interest of your constituents in this issue. I'm Tiffany Muller. I'm the president of In Citizens United and Let America Vote Action Fund. And our mission's really simple. We want to get big money out of politics. We want to make sure that everyone has the right to vote. And we're going to fight back against voter suppression across the country. And we want to help make sure that we pass meaningful reforms that actually put power back in the hands of the people. Because we know that right now, Washington isn't working the way it should, right? Right now, Washington's actually pretty broken. And that is because, as the congressman said, there are self-interested politicians who are far more interested in protecting their own re-elections and their big money donors than they are with protecting the American people. And it's why we see things like, big pharma spending hundreds of millions of dollars to lobby and to influence elections and getting a $76 billion tax cut, but your prescription drug prices keep going up. It's because right now the system isn't working the way it should. And so that's what we're fighting to change. And the first time I traveled to this district was prior to the 2018 election cycle. I'm going to take a guess, Congressman, and say it was like August of 2018. But it could have even been September of 2018. And I had been going around the country and doing events on the need for comprehensive democracy reform with candidates across the country. And normally I would walk into these things and there'd be 30 people, 50 people, we might get 75 people. And I walked in to this event, and Congressman, I think there were 300 people in that room. It was packed and people were so excited. And Congressman Sarbanes was with me. He and I enjoy traveling together on this roadshow to talk about the need to fix our system. And as we were doing Q&A at the end, one of the people that was there that day said, I want to believe that you all will make things better. I want to believe that you'll change the system, but we all hear this talk too often, but nothing ever gets done. And Congressman Sarbanes and Congressman Malinowski both said, give us a chance, right? Like, give us a chance and let us show you what we can do. And within the first 100 days in 2019, that's exactly what Congressman Malinowski did. He passed the most comprehensive democracy reform bill that we've seen in 100 years in the first 100 days. And look, Senator McConnell blocked it in the legislative graveyard in the Senate that time around. But we have a chance now. We have this once in a generation opportunity to actually now make it law and to change the future of our democracy. And that is really what is at stake, is what path are we going to go down? Are we going to go down a path where we are empowering people, putting power back in the hands of people, making it a system more closely aligned to our founding about one voice, one vote? Or are we going to continue to go down a road where certain people are kept from voting, where we continue with partisan gerrymandering, and we continue to see the system being rigged for those who can write the biggest checks? I know where the congressman's at. I know where we're at. We're working every day to activate our 4 million members across the country to make sure that we get this passed and signed into law. So Congressman Malinowski, there's no way we would be here today without your leadership and without you fighting for these issues and having it be a real centerpiece of what you do each and every day in Congress. And so we're so grateful for your partnership and your leadership. And for all of you who are joining us today, you all are lucky. I mean, what an incredible congressman you all have, an incredible representative. So I have some slides, a few slides to share to kind of talk about the problem, where we're at, how it's specifically impacting New Jersey. And then I know the congressman and I are both really looking forward to just getting to Q&A. So if that works for you, I will start sharing. Sound good? All right, let us go. So as the congressman said, right now we're really seeing two different paths right now. And one of them is not genuine at all. Right now, the arguments against HR1 and S1 are really very disingenuous. And particularly when you contrast that with what we're seeing across the country, which is that currently we are seeing the most massive attack on voting rights and the biggest voting suppression bills introduced that we have seen in really since the Jim Crow era. Right now, there are 253 bills introduced in 43 states that would restrict access to voting. This says that's a more than fourfold increase from a year ago. It's actually now a sevenfold increase from a year ago. And let's talk about what those bills do. Those bills say, well, we're going to take away your ability to vote by mail. We're going to make it harder to register to vote. We are going to expand kicking people off of voter rolls. In each of these states, in Georgia, for instance, there are over 50 different restrictive changes being introduced to keep people from voting. And as the congressman said, sometimes the folks who are proposing these bills aren't even being coy about why they're proposing them. As a matter of fact, just the other day in the Supreme Court, the Republican National Committee lawyer said if these voting restrictions are not upheld, Republican candidates can't win. That is really what it's about. Rather than going out and trying to sell their ideas and winning people over to their side, they're just trying to keep people from voting. And if I sound frustrated by that or angry about that, I'm sorry, but I am, because it so goes against everything our democracy stands for. And right there in New Jersey, you are not immune from this. We are seeing one of the worst bills introduced in New Jersey's state legislature that we have seen in quite some time. It would eliminate New Jersey's permanent absentee voting list, meaning if you, right now, since 2016, if you want to vote by mail, you can, and you get added to the permanent absentee ballot list, meaning they automatically send you a ballot so that you can vote by mail. We understand how convenient this is and how important it is to increasing turnout. And so right now they're actually trying to roll back that provision. And we're going to talk here in a second about how HR1 actually helps with these efforts across the country and actually would mitigate these voter restrictions. But so even right there in New Jersey, you're seeing this too. And look, you have also seen the impact of the big money that's flooded into the system since Citizens United. Our name is in Citizens United. We absolutely want to overturn that disastrous Supreme Court decision. And as I'm sure many of you have heard me say before, that decision did two really simple things. It said corporations are people and money equals speech. It really put a for sale sign on our democracy. So in New Jersey alone, we have seen outside spending go from $18.5 million pre-Citizens United to over $100 million being spent in New Jersey from outside special interest groups to influence elections. We talked about Big Pharma a little bit ago and how they spend hundreds of millions of dollars on elections and lobbying. They have 1,500 lobbyists on Capitol Hill on any given day. That's 3 for every member of Congress. And it has meant it has actually meant a increase in drug prices in across America, including in New Jersey, where almost a quarter of New Jersey residents have had to stop taking medication prescribed due to the cost increase. And diabetes drugs have almost doubled in price in New Jersey and just from 2012 to 2017. And yet they were rewarded with a $76 billion corporate tax cut in the Republican tax bill in 2017. That's not the way our system's supposed to work. So the For the People Act is full of common sense reforms that we know people throughout America support. 83% of Americans support the For the People Act. That includes over 70% of Republicans. So this is not a partisan bill anywhere except for on Capitol Hill, where self-interested politicians are interested in gaming the system so that they can continue to win re-elections. But let's talk about what HR1 does. The congressman talked about some of these, so I'll make this quick. But first, it makes it easier to register. It actually, we have automatic voter registration in 20 states right now. This expands it nationally. It means that 50 million new voters would be eligible to vote. It increases turnout among youth voters, African-American voters, Latino voters by doing same-day registration. It prevents those discriminatory voter purges that we've seen. From 2014 to 2018, there were 30 million voters purged from our rolls nationally. As the congressman talked about, it stops that partisan gerrymandering that we've seen across the country. Right now, every single election over the past decade, Republicans have held about 18 seats more in the House of Representatives than they should have because of extreme partisan gerrymandering. We just need fair maps. We just need to make sure that voters are choosing their elected officials rather than the other way around. And HR 1 institutes independent redistricting commissions to make sure that that happens. It allows everyone across the country to vote to vote by mail without needing an excuse. That expands that to 76 million voters who right now don't have that ability. And it makes sure that there's 15 days of early voting. Because I don't know about you all, but my schedule's crazy. I can't always get to the polls on election day. So sometimes I need to go the weekend before or after work one day. It shines a light on the dark money that's being spent, or apparently, as the Republicans said during the debate, it bans anonymous speech. Right now, we know that there's been almost $1 billion in dark money, anonymous money spent in our elections since the Citizens United decision. And look, if we don't know where that money's coming from, then we have no way to trace it back to make sure there's not foreign government interference, to make sure that we can actually have accountability. We think that there should be limits on spending as well, but at the very least, we should actually know where that money's coming from and why they're spending it to influence the elections. And it stops the unregulated online ads that, as the congressman said, in the lead up to the 2016 election, Russian generated content in our elections was seen by over 150 million Americans. Think about that. 150 million Americans actually saw election disinformation from a foreign government. So those are just some of the big pieces that HR 1 does and the ways that it would help level the playing field, both across the country and right there in New Jersey. And so we are so excited that it passed the House on Wednesday night, and we are now moving over to the Senate. And we have a real chance to get this done and get this signed into law. So, Congressman, I turn it back to you.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. And I think actually we're going to go to comments and questions now.
Yeah, thank you both for both of your remarks. Very helpful. Just a reminder, we are recording this conversation for distribution purposes, so all of this information is being recorded for your convenience as well. Next up, we are going to begin with a few frequently asked questions that were submitted beforehand. And after that, we will go into live questioning. If you submitted a question before this event and it is not answered in the FAQ portion, please ask again in the chat feature for it to be answered live today. Just a reminder, you do so by asking your question in the chat feature at the bottom of your screen. And we ask that you please include where you are from in when you ask that question as well. Now would be a great time to start asking those questions in the chat feature. All right, for our first question, I know some of these we have already addressed, but we may want to reiterate it as it's on the top of everyone's minds. What are the chances of getting HR 1 through the Senate? It seems hopeless and impossible.
Well, I am happy to take the first swing at this, and then Congressman, you should too. We have a real shot at this, and let's talk about why that is. That is because you all worked so hard and helped flip the Senate. We actually have different leadership in both the White House and the Senate. HR 1's companion bill in the Senate is S1, which means it has also been designated as the first legislative priority in the Senate. And look, there have been 4 times in the last 20 years where HR 1 and S1 were the same bill, like they are right now. All 4 times they've become law. That is good precedence for us. And I fully expect and believe that we can get it done again this time. In order to get the For the People Act to become HR 1, to become S1, we had to overcome some seemingly impossible barriers to get to that point. We had to actually convince people that folks like you cared about these issues, that it was important enough to make it HR1 or S1. We had to show that it resonated with voters across the country. We had to show the urgency of it. The reason we're going to be able to get this done is because there is an understanding amongst our elected leadership about how this impacts every other issue we want to tackle, whether it is prescription drug costs or climate change or gun violence background checks or anything else. There's an understanding that right now the way our democracy is set up is not fair and doesn't allow us to actually make progress on all of those other important priorities to the American people. So just last night, we had POTUS, the president of the United States, tweeting about the need to pass HR1. We had the vice president tweeting about the need to pass HR1. You had the former First Lady Michelle Obama tweeting about the need to pass HR1. Everyone is in on this. But what it's going to take is all of us not being complacent, not thinking it's impossible, but creating a different reality. Making sure that even if you all have, like you have Senator Cory Booker, who is an incredible champion on these issues, but guess what? He still needs to hear from you. He still needs to hear from his constituents that this matters to their day-to-day life. I need you all to call him. I need you to email. I need you to get 5 family and friends to call and to email. We have to make this a drumbeat that cannot be ignored. There have been other times where things felt like they were just, foregone conclusion in DC. I'll give you one that always comes to mind for me is in 2017, Republicans took back the trifecta and they were absolutely going to wipe out the ACA. Remember that? The Affordable Care Act, they were going to repeal it. And guess what? They didn't. And you know why they didn't? Because we organized, we raised our voices. Frankly, we raised a little bit of hell. We made sure that they couldn't do that they couldn't cast that vote. And that's what we have to do this time as well. We can create a different reality, but it is going to take all of us. So, Congressman.
Thank you. What Tiffany just described is basically the way we always overcome resistance to do great things in America. And if the resistance wasn't there, it would have been done a long time ago. It would be easy. We are doing something that is in fact very hard. I'll give you the hard realism side of this, which is that Mitch McConnell needs dark money more than a scuba diver needs oxygen. And that's why this has been so hard. The difference now, in just 2 months, the difference is that he was able to bottle this up in the Senate so that there wouldn't even be a debate, so that there wouldn't be any attention even in the public. Because what's the point of writing an article in the newspaper? What's the point of putting it on CNN and Fox News if the thing's not even going to come up before the United States Senate? There's so much else going on to write about and to talk about. Now he can't do that anymore. It's not going to be bottled up because we have a majority leader in the US Senate who is committed to this. We can force a vote. And by forcing a vote, we can force a debate. And by forcing a debate, we can create public pressure on senators to change their minds about HR1 or at least parts of HR1. And that's when that starts happening, that's when we're in business. At the end of the day, look, it's a huge sprawling bill. We want to get to that ideal point that I described early on, where there's still some opposition and criticism, but we're actually talking about the specific provisions that people are concerned about and negotiating compromises where necessary to pass something that fundamentally achieves what HR1 is designed to achieve. We have put ourselves, let me correct that. You have put us in a position where we're able to do that. And just as with every other great legislative reform in American history, it's not easy. It will take a lot of effort. It will take a lot of time. We've tried once. This is our second try. Hopefully we can get it done on our second try. If not, we'll get it done on our third try. But we are going to get it done as long as we believe that it's possible. So let's follow Tiffany's advice. Let's play to win. Let's use all the cards that we have. And I believe that'll get us to where we need to be.
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Tiffany. We have a lot of questions rolling in, so we are going to go right into live questioning. Just a reminder, please use the chat feature at the bottom of your screen to ask your question first, and I will then bring you up live once I put you into the queue. Please include your town, what town you are from, along with your question. Our first live questioner is Valerie from Bud Lake. Valerie, can you hear us?
Yes, I can. Could you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. So, I did send a few questions in. I'll pick one of them.
Valerie, you might have muted yourself here.
Call if, can you hear me?
Yes, you're back. Hey,
Okay,
Valerie.
sorry, someone was calling me. I did email questions, so I would appreciate if you could email answers back. I got sort of a form letter answer. I do have several questions. I guess the most important one that I'll pick has to do with the 6-to-1 funding of campaigns that is included in the bill, and how is that, anticipated to work. My understanding is that campaign donations would be matched at the federal level by a 6-to-1 match. I'm not real clear on where that money is coming from.
Yes. That's.
I love this one, right?
Yeah.
This is great. So this actually doesn't come from any taxpayer dollars. This comes from, it's a completely voluntary system of empowering small dollar donors. Because right now, look, we know that too often big donors are setting the policy agenda in Washington, and too often when someone comes to Washington, they have to spend 25 or 30 hours a week doing call time, right? And so this is about how do we actually change that system. So this is a voluntary system that takes no taxpayer dollars. It's actually funded by a small surcharge on any corporations who have been fined for malfeasance or negligence. And it actually more than pays for the system. It even reduces the deficit by $1 billion over 10 years. And this, not only does it, make sure that folks can focus on doing their job and working with and for their constituents, but it also says you won't take any contribution over $1,000, and you won't take any PAC money. So it really does make the elected official much more responsive to their voters. And it opens doors for candidates who otherwise wouldn't even be able to run. Working class backgrounds, women candidates, candidates of color. So all with no taxpayer dollars. Congressman, sorry,
Yeah.
I kind of jumped in there at the beginning.
No, that's great. I mean,
Can I
let me
follow up there for a second.
Yeah, go ahead, Valerie.
So what is the allocation of those dollars? Is that to all parties? I'm an independent, so I'm always interested in
Yes.
knowing where those dollars are going to be, broken out between parties or independents or, even Libertarian Party.
Yes.
Not
Anyone can opt in, right? If you're the nominee of your party, right? That's when it kicks in, right, Tiffany?
You can actually, as long there's a viability threshold of I think you have to collect $50,000 or something like that in small dollar donations, and if you hit that, you can opt into the program, and that's for any party. Yeah.
So look, let me bring this down to earth. As somebody who's now run for Congress a couple of times, I got to raise money to do it, because as you all know, I'm in a very competitive district, which is great. It means I have to work hard, but it also means that just like whoever's running against me, I've got to raise money to be able to get my message out through advertising and by hiring staff to run a grassroots campaign. And right now, to be able to raise that amount of money, I've got to do what Tiffany referred to as call time, which means a certain number of hours a week, I've got to get on the phone and call people who can write me campaign donations under that limit that each individual can give. Now, I've decided I'm not going to take any corporate PAC money. That's just a voluntary pledge that I've made. So I'm relying only on individuals. And they can give up to basically $2,900 each for the primary election and another $2,900 for the general election. And it's obviously better for me if somebody writes that full check, right? Because then I can make more money. So, and that's what candidates are drawn to do, to spend their time to do. Now, if this were to pass and I were to opt into it, I could come to Bud Lake and have somebody who's not that wealthy invite 100 of their friends to their backyard for a barbecue, and everybody pays $20. And so that's 100 times 20 bucks, right? That's $2,000 maybe right there, but matched 6 times through this fund. And that would be great. Like I could actually finance an expensive campaign by doing that. And so instead of spending my time chasing the wealthier donors, I spend more time with constituents, with people at all economic levels who might be able and willing to chip in a little bit to support a candidate that they believe in. And now take me times 535 congressmen and senators. Think about how that changes how politics is done in America. Now, this is important. It's important you raise this because one of the big attacks against this bill, which we didn't mention, is on this provision, because there are a lot of people on the other side who say that this is about taxpayer funding of our campaigns. And you'll probably even see ads, you know, Tom Malinowski wants your taxpayer dollars to pay for his TV ads. And that's just not true, as Tiffany explained. The funding system, you know, think about that case where Purdue Pharmaceuticals, which was responsible for selling opiates to millions of Americans and getting us addicted to opioids in the 1990s. And they're now being held accountable for it. They're being fined huge, huge amounts of money, billions of dollars. And so what this bill would do is put a surcharge on that fine. So let's say you're paying a $10 billion fine. There's a surcharge on top of that, which would go into this fund to help candidates free themselves from the influence of big money. And it makes such sense. It's not taxpayers paying for it. It's the lawbreakers who would be paying for it. It would be paid for as almost a tax on their corruption to help us better fight corruption. And so I think once you explain that to folks, it makes a lot of sense. And so I'm glad we had a chance to explain it on the call today.
So that kind of, it makes sense to me, but I guess maybe I should ask it a different way.
Okay.
It doesn't seem to level the playing field at all in that, is it that if I donate $1 million and the candidate I'm donating to opts in, he bumps up his campaign contribution by ×6?
No, it's limited to only the small dollar contributions. Only the small ones would be matched.
Right, but it's still just bumping up the person you're donating to, correct?
So
No.
you would, yeah,
go ahead.
Go, Tiffany.
I was just going to say it's only matched up to $200, and you actually aren't allowed to take any donation over $1,000 under the system. So it actually, and it's capped. There's a whole formula about how much everything is capped at for all candidates. So no is the answer, the short answer. It actually forces folks to refocus on those smaller dollar donors who are donating because they believe in a candidate and they want to get involved and they want to be part of their democracy. And it actually does help folks who don't have access to big donors be able to successfully run for office, which I think is something we should all be working toward.
Great. Thank you, Tiffany. And thank you, Tom. We have some more questions coming in. Our next questioner is Bart from Wharton. Bart, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Hi, Bart.
Great. Hi. Thank you so much for having this event. My question is, how is election integrity protected or bolstered in HR 1? And what parts of HR 1 do you think are questionable or negative?
You want to take the election
You
integrity?
go, you start, Congressman, especially because this feels so much in your wheelhouse.
Yeah. So there's a lot of debate about election integrity in the country right now. And I think different people mean different things when they talk about election integrity. And so we have to be clear about what we mean. On the one hand, of course, there are people who raised questions about the integrity of the 2020 election, who raised questions about the integrity of voting by mail and drop boxes and some of the rules that we put into place in New Jersey and other states to try to make it easier and safer for people to vote, especially during a pandemic. And I'm always willing to hear people out because it's essential that we not allow any cheating or fraud in our elections, anything that would undermine confidence in those elections. But I think it is fair to say that those allegations, when they were taken to court, which is where we resolve our disputes in America, turned out to be without merit. There was no evidence presented to courts that any court in this country found persuasive. And in fact, if you look at the 2020 election, it was, most experts would say, the most secure and safe election that we have had in modern times in America. There are also concerns about going forward, though, about how do we protect our election systems, which are different in every state. They're very decentralized in America. How do we protect them against things like electronic hacking? How do we protect ourselves against foreign interference, whether it's from Russia, which we saw happening in 2016, whether it's China or Iran or North Korea? All of these countries, adversaries of the United States, have at least the capability of messing with our systems, and in some cases, the stated intent to mess with us. And so HR 1 particularly takes aim at those potential problems. It provides money to states to harden their election systems, the physical security of our voting machines, for example, of our counting systems, the security of our voter registration rolls, so that nobody can hack in and take your name off the voter registration roll to create confusion. And it's also got several good provisions that Tiffany and I alluded to before to protect us against foreign interference, to prevent campaigns in the future, political campaigns, from cooperating in any way with foreign government actors by sharing their private polling data, for example, by soliciting help from foreign intelligence agencies. Whatever you think happened or didn't happen in 2016, we all agree it shouldn't happen and that we should have safeguards against that sort of thing in the future. So those are some of the features of the bill. Now, you asked whether there's something negative about HR 1. I support the bill. I like what's in it, but I'm always open to folks who criticize a particular piece of it. And you heard me say that in order to pass this bill, I'm willing to make compromises. I'm willing to hear out people on the other side who say, I like 80% of it, but I've got issues with this, and would you be willing to work with me to address them? And the answer is always going to be yes, because I want, at the end of the day, to be able to deliver something that makes things better for us, even if it's not 100% of what I want.
Well, I really appreciate that position, that you're willing to work with folks when they disagree with you. I wish that was more rampant in Congress, to say the truth. But just regarding the first answer to the first question, the first part of the question, we've heard for many, many years and probably decades that mail-in voting is susceptible to voter fraud. This is a nonpartisan issue. So specifically, if you were going to look at that and the mass mail-in voting, I guess there's nothing in this bill that addresses that specifically.
Tiffany, do you want to jump in, or I can?
I was just going to say what we have seen is that there actually is not massive fraud related to mail-in voting. Mail-in voting is secure, and there were multiple audits across the country that looked at mail-in voting and looked at whether or not fraud happened, not just in 2020, but we've looked at multiple other elections, and there just is not any massive fraud, or really almost any fraud. It is negligible at best. And what we've seen previously is that actually most expansion of mail-in voting has been done in a really bipartisan way. That in all of these states and in HR1, there's things like signature matches that are put into place. There are audits that are put into place to make sure that there isn't any fraud. There's barcodes put into place so that we are holding those things secure. And states like Utah and Arizona and Colorado and many others have been doing vote by mail almost exclusively for years, and led by Republicans and Democrats alike, who have been making sure that there is not fraud in those systems, and none has been found. Congressman?
Yeah, and we can require those measures, right? So when we encourage mail-in voting, I do think, Bart raises a legitimate question. It is important to require those safeguards. So like in New Jersey, I'm sure you all remember when we were doing the mail-in ballots during the pandemic, it wasn't just some piece of paper that anybody could Xerox, right, and mail in. That there were barcodes that were individualized to each voter, right? So your barcode was going to be different from anybody else's, linked to your name, linked to your address, and also signature matching requirements, all kinds of ways that if there were any effort to cheat on a large scale, it would be very easily noticed by our election authorities. And even if one individual ballot was suspicious, let's say one ballot for me was suspicious, my opponent could challenge it. And then they'd look at the signature, they'd investigate that particular ballot. There's enough information there to make it really, really hard for somebody to do anything wrong. But I think you're right in suggesting that we need to require those measures if we're going to have widespread mail-in voting, and continue to get better.
And so many of those, as you know, Congressman, are built into HR1, including like the signature matching and how to track the ballots in the mail. And the great news is that the system worked. There were a few random cases where problems were flagged, and it was flagged because of those safeguards. So the Congressman's absolutely right.
Thank you both for answering that question. We know that Tiffany is on a tight schedule here. So Tiffany, if you have any—
I do have a question. I do have a question. I'm Nancy from Bedminster. May I ask?
Nancy,
we have 7 minutes, 6 minutes left.
Just have a few other questions to get through, and I want to give time to Tiffany to give some closing remarks, and then I can turn it over to you.
And then I'm on for longer, so we'll get to the questions. Don't worry.
Tom will be on for
longer. I'm sorry that I have to leave a few minutes early. I have a hard stop in the next event I have to get to. But this has been such a pleasure to be with all of you today. And as I said, the Congressman is such an incredible leader on these issues and has been so instrumental in getting to the place that we're at today, which is that HR1 has passed the House. We have an opportunity to reset the levers of our democracy, make sure it works for the people again, not just the special interests, make sure we have real disclosure and transparency and accountability, crack down on corruption in both parties. And it is because of his leadership. And so it's why we at In Citizens United are so proud to stand with him and to be here with him today. I look forward to coming back. He keeps inviting me back for some reason, so that's good for me. And I hope that all of you will reach out and contact your senators and tell them and encourage them to make sure that S1 passes and becomes law, because even though they're supportive, they still need to hear from you. So Congressman, I really appreciate you inviting me back today and appreciate the time. And it's been such a pleasure to be with you today.
Thank you, Tiffany.
All
See you
right.
soon. Bye-bye.
We really appreciate it. Next queued up, we have time for just a few more questions to ask of Tom. So you can continue submitting those questions through the chat feature. We have Kara from Flemington. Kara, can you hear us?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, okay, my question actually follows just what Tiffany had just stated, and that was really, what's the best way for us to be, for us to be helpful? How can we help? It was really good to hear about reaching out to our senators, because all this time I kind of figured they were on board where I was, but I will actually go make those calls or send emails or do both. But the question is, how else can we be helpful?
Yeah, well, just, you know, they are they're supportive, but just like me, they've got a million different options because of all the different issues that we deal with in Congress. So making sure this is a priority, making sure that of the 1,000 or million bills that Senators Menendez and Booker can prioritize, that this is one of them, and that they can say that they're hearing this from their constituents, which makes their argument stronger to their colleagues. So I think that is important. And then I think just continuing to promote a community conversation about this, because look, there's an active and sometimes contentious debate in America, particularly since the last election and what happened on January 6th, a debate about our democracy, about our elections, about election integrity, about election fraud, about corruption in our politics. People have very strong views, and sometimes we get angry at each other. And I think anything that we can do in our own communities, in our own, you know, in the groups that we have these discussions with, to try to bring the conversation back to basics and back to common ground is incredibly helpful. You know, if you're more liberal and progressive, not to be dismissive of people who are more conservative, who are concerned about election integrity. They have every right to be. That's something we have to be absolutely vigilant about. But at the same time, I think if you're more conservative, you'd find that actually a lot of folks on my side share your fundamental concerns about Washington, you know, the game being rigged, and the need to return government to the people in the ways that we are discussing here today. We desperately need to find more common ground in America on a lot of issues, and this one in particular, and that begins with all of those community conversations. So those two things: hold your members of Congress and the Senate accountable, make sure that they hear from you about your priorities, and help to moderate and elevate that community conversation that's the basis for all we do. Thanks.
Thank you.
Great, thank you, Kara. Next up, we have Jean from Stanton. Jean, can you hear us?
I can. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, hi, Jean.
Two quick comments, then a question. The first is, I want to tell you, I love the Zoom sessions because I get to attend them in my pajamas and sip coffee from my favorite mug. The second thing is I'm very proud to have you as my congressman, and I appreciate everything you try to do for me, my family, my state, and my country. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So my question then is, do these bills or any other bills under consideration provide a provision for in-person voting on the weekends? So for example, a lot of people talk about the mail-in ballots, but in-person voting, is there anything in there or under consideration for weekend voting to make it easier for people?
Yeah, so it encourages early voting, whether by mail or drop boxes or in person. And we found, you know, we just had this experience in 2020 where we used all three in different states, and they all worked pretty well. The drop boxes were kind of a new innovation that a lot of people liked too. And so it does require states, the bill does require states to make those things available. And, you know, Tiffany mentioned some of the bills that are being considered in places like Georgia, for example. In Georgia, there's a bill that limits early in-person voting to make it 6 days a week, but not Sundays. And it's pretty clear that the main reason why they're doing that is that in Georgia, there's a tradition of early voting on Sundays by African-American voters. And so that seems to a lot of us to be a very clear case of racially based voter suppression, the sort of thing that Georgia would not have been able to do under the old Voting Rights Act. And the Voting Rights Act was, as many of you know, pretty much gutted a few years ago by a Supreme Court decision called Shelby. And that freed these states with a history of racially based voter suppression from being supervised by the federal Justice Department in making these changes. And so the other bill that we haven't talked about that much, H.R. 4, is a bill we call the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, named after our late colleague, John Lewis. And it restores the full effectiveness of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. That's something we are working through the House. We have to hold some hearings. We have to really kind of build up a record of evidence that these problems still exist in some of these southern states. We will then send that to the Senate. And historically, the Voting Rights Act has been renewed in the Senate almost unanimously, with all the Republicans voting for it and all the Democrats voting for it. So that'll be another test. And I think we have a pretty good shot actually of getting that through the Senate later this year.
Great. Thank you very much for
Thank you so much.
answer.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gene, and thank you, Tom. We are nearing the end of this call. I know we had a lot of questions come in, but we are nearing the end. So I'm going to turn it over to Tom for some closing remarks in just a little bit.
I could take one more if there's any more outstanding, Nari. I don't want to.
Why don't we take
too
one
many.
more? We can take
Okay.
one more from Ella from Skillman. Ella, can you hear us? Ella, do we have you on the line? No worries. Next up, let's try Brooks from North Plainfield.
Hey, Tom. Listen, I just wondered, this issue of the Democrats always doing better with higher voter turnout, is that statistically grounded? Or is that just kind of our impressions, our thoughts?
I'm not sure if that's true, actually. Yes, there is conventional wisdom. The conventional view is that somehow Democrats do better with higher turnout. And that may be one reason why some Republicans are opposed to this bill. I'm not sure if that's actually true. In my own race, in our district in 2020, as you all know, it was very, very close. It was actually closer than most of the polls told us, predicted it was going to be. And we had astronomically high turnout, one of the highest in history. And my impression as a candidate, with my ear to the ground, was that very, very high turnout. A lot of those voters who voted who maybe don't normally vote, who don't vote usually, tended to be supporters of President Trump more than supporters of now President Biden. I'm still for encouraging people to vote and making it easier for people to vote, even if it means I do not as well. That's not the point. I think anybody who's in politics should be for making it as easy as possible for people to vote, whether they are members of your party or not, whatever the outcome is going to be, and to have the confidence, this is the main point, to have the confidence in your own convictions, in your own values, that you can persuade those people to vote for you. And if I can't persuade them to vote for me, then I deserve to lose. That's my attitude.
Well, thank you for your tremendous leadership, your grace, and your incredible competence, and we will make sure you do not lose.
Well, thank you so much. I'll do my best to earn that.
Thank you, Brooks. Next up, we have Maureen. Maureen, can you hear us? Maureen, do we have you?
Yes. I don't really have a question for Tom. My question was for the person who said that there was evidence that mail-in voting is subject to fraud. And my question for him, sort of theoretical, was what is that evidence? Yeah. And then I also put in there what Tiffany had said, that, you know, in 5 states, mail-in voting is predominantly the way those states conduct their elections.
Yeah,
and
so
yeah,
it's true. Like, I mean, most of us experienced massive mail-in voting for the first time in 2020, but there are a bunch of states that are 100% vote by mail and have been for many years. One of them is Utah, which, as you all know, is a overwhelmingly Republican state. This includes Colorado and Washington and Oregon and Hawaii as well, and they've done fine with it. And you know, just to reprise it, there's not a lot of evidence. There's certainly no evidence of any kind of massive irregularities or fraud with vote by mail. But at the same time, I think, look, I understand why people ask that question, because, you know, it's this thing that comes to your house, right? And you just put it in the mailbox. And I think it's healthy that people raise questions about how we can make sure that it's being done with integrity, that the wrong people aren't voting, that you can't just, you know, print up, that Russia can't print 1 million fake ballots and put them in mailboxes in America to try to fix our elections. I want people to be asking those questions and to be testing us and to be coming up with all of the unlikely but possible scenarios under which somebody might try to mess with our elections that way, because you have to be vigilant, right? We have to prepare the system, harden the system against any possible attempt to undermine it, no matter how unlikely. And that goes for mail-in voting, that goes for voting on a machine. There are a lot of folks who worry that the machines can be hacked as well. It's very unlikely, but I'm glad that they're raising that concern, because it forces us to make sure that it can't happen.
What about my question about the suppression of Hunter Biden's story? Isn't that voter suppression?
I've read a lot about the Hunter Biden allegations. It was something that was debated a lot in the election. So,
what about Hunter Biden laptop? I mean, clearly there was a suppression of it.
Again, I think I disagree with you, but I think that's, you know, it's a free country and people are free to raise those kinds of allegations. And they were raised by former President Trump, who had, of course, a very big megaphone to try to persuade us that that was a problem, and people made their decisions on election day based on their convictions. So nobody's suppressing that. There are just some people who disagree with it, which we have a right to do, just as folks who believe that it was a problem have a right to raise the concern. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Tom.
Okay.
All right, we are going to take one more question from Brett C. Brett, can you hear us?
Sure can. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Hey, Tom, good to see you again. Thanks for this tremendous session. My question is, you know, in this current environment, the idea of getting 10 Republicans to support S1 seems like it's going to be a heavy lift. And I wonder if there's already talk about the filibuster and potentially suspending the filibuster for at least for this sort of important election vote.
Yeah. So the
thoughts on that?
Filibuster, I mean, I think it's a big problem. I mentioned in my opening remarks, 40 senators representing 19% of the American people can block anything, and they can do it routinely. They don't even have to lift a finger, right? And that's not what the framers of the Constitution designed the Senate to be. They did want it to be a check on the tyranny of the majority, but they didn't want to require as a routine matter 60 votes for any normal piece of legislation. So I'm for getting rid of it. I'm skeptical that we will get rid of it in this term because Senator Manchin in particular has said, stop asking me. My answer is hell no. And I take him at his word. At some point, you got to accept that, that's how he feels. But there are alternatives. There are middle ground solutions to this problem that I hope we come to. Our first step has to be to try to pass things with 60 votes, to try to work with our Republican colleagues, see what can be accomplished, to be as reasonable as possible. And if they're willing to work with us, and that will mean compromise on both sides, then great, we do that. And if they're not, if they just shut down everything, even things that are supported by the overwhelming majority of Americans. Let's say they refuse to even take up, refuse to even consider voting for the John Lewis Voting Rights Act, for example. Then I think that's a strong argument for moderate Democrats like Senator Manchin to consider reform of the filibuster. That could mean exempting certain types of bills, like voting rights bills, given the history of how the filibuster was used in the 60s against voting rights legislation. It could mean, and this is my favorite idea, actually going back to the old filibuster, where you could filibuster any bill, any senator can filibuster any bill, but you actually have to stand up on the floor of the Senate and speak and speak and speak and speak. You gotta really mean it, even if you're reading the phone book or something, because then the person doing the filibuster has to take responsibility for it and draw public attention to themselves. And then you have a debate. It's too easy to filibuster right now. And so it's done on everything. If you make it a little bit harder, then I think you restore some of the balance that we need between majority rule and minority rights. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks, Brett. And Tom, we're now going to turn it over to you for some closing remarks. Thank you, everyone, for being on this call today. We really appreciate it. And Tom, I'll let you have the last word.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Nari, and thank you, everybody. Look, I think this was a really good discussion. There's obviously a lot of support out there for the ideas in HR 1. There's also some skepticism and some opposition, and we heard some of those voices here today, and I think that's really, really important. I love doing these sessions where we can share what we are doing in the Congress, and I can tell you what I believe in and what I stand for. But you also have a chance to tell me whether you think I'm right or wrong, and to ask questions to help you better understand what's going on in Congress and how I'm representing you. So this is a topic we've come back to several times, and we'll keep on doing that. But we'll also keep on doing this on other issues that are important to all of you. If there's an issue that you would like us to dedicate a session to and try to bring experts like Tiffany to talk to us about, please let my team know, and we'll consider it. So meanwhile, thank you, everybody. Please stay safe in these hopefully last few weeks and months of the pandemic. More help is on the way there as well, as you know. So stay healthy, stay in touch with us, and I look forward to our next conversation.